All right, let's jump right into a really fascinating economic puzzle that comes out of a recent study on entrepreneurship in Russia. We're about to unpack some data that pretty much flips a lot of common assumptions on their head when it comes to what actually drives people to start a business.
So what if I told you that this number, just 2%, represents the entire entrepreneurship gender gap in Russia? Yep, that's the difference in the rate that men and women are starting businesses. It is an incredibly tiny number, especially when you start to look at it on a global scale.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Let's put that 2% into perspective. You look at a country like Italy, the gap's at 15%, and Greece it's 10%. So Russia's number is so much lower. It's a genuine statistical outlier. It really stands out, even when you compare it to a lot of highly developed countries.
So naturally, this brings up a huge question for economists, for sociologists, for pretty much everyone looking at this. What on earth is driving this near parity? What explains it? Well, the answer, as we're about to find out, is definitely not what you'd think.
Okay, to get to the bottom of this mystery, the researchers started by looking at all the usual suspects. The typical factors that are almost always used to explain these kinds of gender gaps everywhere else. And what are those usual suspects? Well, these three are pretty much always at the top of the list. Higher education, marital status, and the number of children someone has. These are the absolute go-to variables for this kind of research.
And, the logic behind it seems solid, right? The common thinking is that, well, higher ed gives you the skills you need, being married can provide a kind of financial safety net, and having kids often creates this really powerful need for the work-life flexibility that entrepreneurship can offer.
But, and this is a big but, here is where the story takes a really sharp turn. The study crunched a massive amount of data. We're talking nearly 200,000 observations from over 33,000 people, collected over 20 years in Russia. And the results? They were completely, totally unexpected. So here's the bombshell, the crucial finding. All those usual suspects we just talked about, they had pretty much zero statistical significance. That's right, education, marital status, number of kids, none of them, none, were the real drivers explaining Russia's tiny gap. And as the study's author points out, policies aimed at, say, increasing female education to close the gap, well, they might just be irrelevant in the Russian context. Why? Because Russian women already have incredibly high levels of education, often even higher than men, and there are these really strong state support systems like robust childcare. So those factors just don't have the same impact that they might in other countries.
So this is a real turning point, right? If all the standard explanations just don't hold up, then what is it? What hidden factors are actually at play here? What's really closing that gap in Russia?
Okay, so what the study found was this really stark contrast between what we thought mattered and what actually does. On one side, you have the weak predictors we've been talking about, education, marriage, kids. But on the other side, you have two totally surprising factors that showed real significant statistical power.
So what were they? The analysis pinpointed two powerful predictors for entrepreneurship, and this is for both men and women: regular physical exercise and participation in religious events. Yeah, you heard that right, hitting the gym and going to church.
Now, hold on, this isn't really about the push-ups or the prayers themselves. It's about what these activities cultivate. Think about it. Both sports and religious groups are these powerful engines for building social networks. Sports can help foster really useful personality traits like competitiveness and resilience. And religious communities, they can provide mentorship, resources, and a built-in support system. Basically, both of them create pathways to opportunity that exist outside of the usual structures.
Okay, so you might be thinking, that's a quirky finding from Russia, but why does it matter for the rest of the world? What's the big takeaway here?
Well, it really challenges us to look beyond the conventional policy playbook. It suggests that, yeah, things like economic and family policies are important, but what if we're missing something huge? What if the powerful role of community, of social networks, of personal development, what if that's a key piece of the puzzle for fostering entrepreneurship for everyone?
And really, at the heart of all this is a concept called social capital. It's basically a fancy term for the real-world value you get from your relationships and your networks. These connections are what provide opportunities, information, and support. All things that are absolutely critical when you're trying to start a business. And what this study shows is that things like sports and religious groups can be incredibly powerful ways to build it.
So the big takeaway here is this. The case in Russia serves as this powerful reminder. It makes us ask a really important question. If education and family policies aren't the whole story, what other hidden factors, what other non-traditional pathways to equality are we missing
not just in Russia, but everywhere. It kind of forces us to think way more creatively about what it really takes to build a truly level playing field.